first day of micro teaching, okay? And our first presenter for the day will be Professor Brinkhuys.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brinkhuys, and I'm from the University of the Western Cape. Today, I'll be speaking on masculinities, the construction of queer masculinity in South African media. Before I start, I'll just like to briefly go over the aims or the objectives of this lecture. So this lecture aims to broaden the understanding of both hegemonic and queer masculinity, convey how queer masculinity is constructed through difference, and to convey that multiple queer masculinities exist. To start off, I'll just define masculinity. Masculinity are traits that are socially and culturally ascribed to men. Socially and culturally in the sense that these masculine traits or behaviors, values, or expectations a society views as being masculine are largely influenced or as a result of socialization or cultural influences. What we have to note is that masculinity is not only socially and culturally constructed, but relationally as well. By relationally, I mean that for us to be able to know or to recognize masculinity, there has to be an opposite being femininity. In this case, I'll be speaking about two masculinities, namely hegemonic masculinity and queer masculinity. I'll start off by delving into hegemonic masculinity, as it is important to note how queer masculinity is constructed in relation to hegemonic masculinity. They are relational opposites after all. Hegemonic masculinity. According to Cornell, hegemonic masculinity refers to or is the idealized form of masculinity at a given place and time. I'd like to take a moment to touch on the place and time. It is important to situate hegemonic masculinity within a given historical context as well as geographically. Hegemonic masculinity masculinities are quite diverse across the globe, and therefore it is important not to only situate it within the historical context but geographic as well, because these masculinities will differ from region to region, and the meanings will also differ in different historical time periods. Therefore the definition by Demetrio says that basically that the use of the concept of hegemonic masculinity is a form of acknowledgement that multiple forms of masculinity exist. Therefore, this concept of hegemonic masculinity is important in constructing queer masculinity, as it denotes difference, and it is within this difference that we are able to perceive something as being queer, or forming part of queer masculinity. So how would you then define queer masculinity? So this is a question to the class. If you had one word to describe queer masculinity, what would it be? I'll have 3 responses, so by a show of hands. Anyone? To me? Different. Thierry? Unique. Okay. Benzo? Flamboyant. Okay. So going on those definitions, which image would you think demonstrates queer masculinity or the representation thereof? See, okay, I knew it. Actually, all 3 of them demonstrate queer masculinity. A, because the clothing wear, like sheer, that is not something that is typically associated with what a man wears. And in B is a gay actor in South Africa, and He is sensitive and caring, and he has all these characteristics or traits that are not normally associated with men. They're actually associated with women. And you see, of course, is the dominant form of queer masculinity that is found within South African media. And it's also what everyone has chosen. It's the stereotypical form of queer masculinity. However, in South African media, there's only one form that is continuously being represented, and that is the feminized, theatricalized, and flamboyant form of queer masculinity, pretty much what was displayed in image C. So, before I go any further, I'd like to define queer masculinity. So I'll just delve into queer as a concept on its own, because I think it's important for us to be able to understand queer masculinity as a whole. So queer masculinity has changed substantially over the past few years, from having negative connotations to being used as a more inclusive term that describes all non-conforming or non-heteronormative identities. What this means is that it describes all identities that do not fit the traditional ideal of what it means to be a man. So what is queer masculinity then? Queer masculinity is a way of being masculine outside of heteronormative constructs that disrupt or have the potential to disrupt traditional images of hegemonic masculinity. With that being said, queer masculinity is not only exhibited by queer males, but by heterosexuals as well as females. An important point found in the literature of De Loretta's, she notes that queer masculinity is both a product and process of representation. Therefore, queer masculinity is a product of the stereotypes that are depicted in South African media. So to understand the importance of observing the representation of queer masculinity within the South African context, I think that it's important to delve into apartheid and how it has shaped the current representation in media. So apartheid refers to an oppressive regime that plagued marginalized communities or groups with both racial struggles and restriction. Therefore, it is important to observe the current representations, specifically people of color, as their identities have been shaped by a long history of racial struggle, as well as deformed by apartheid. In addition to this, queer people of color experience struggle in a duality. The struggle of being black in a racially oppressed regime, and the struggle of being queer in a conservative state during the mid to late 1900s. In 1994, South Africa witnessed the birth of a new democratic society. Since then, South African media representations have shifted from being less visible to becoming more visible as society has become more liberal or progressive. With that being said, I want us to have a look at the current representations in South African media. The first video that I'll be showing is of a South African soap opera called Uzalo. This is a daily South African soap opera that is aired at 8:30 p.m., which is prime time. And I think this is important, especially since media tries to commodify queer masculinity. GC, the one that will be in green, is a beloved queer male who's undoubtedly one of the most popular characters in the series and will demonstrate the stereotypical queer masculinity. So without further ado,
bashila wesizokwazi ukubakhokhela khona wonke umuntu azobabheka hayi hayi hemen usukuyicabanga lento hemen come on hemen hayi hemen usikabayemisa hemen hayi okay yazi uthini ngizobathumela abafana bazoba namabhokisi kodwa ngokulandelayo.
As you might have noticed, this is the dominant form that is found in media. So in addition to this, I'd like to show another video which shows another form of queer masculinity that is not often found in media, especially within this current era. So this video is another South African soap opera that played a few years back, actually. The television soap opera is called Generations, and the two characters will be Senzo, which is the one that you see currently, the one with the baby, and then his husband will come in later on, who is Jason. So this is also queer masculinity, but just a different form.
If anything happens, Baba, bazomfonela bese ngiyabuya quick, okay? Uzama usebenza ngishayisa ngo-4. Yay! Then zokwenza ugeza, sidlale kancane, then I'm gonna read you a bedtime story, okay?
Okay.
Yeah. I've spent so much time with him, it's hard to let go.
So everybody goes, yeah, Sabrina's pretty.
Yeah.
Or at least a version of normal. And organizing clearly having all these strangers at home. Got okay if it helps our son.
At least Mama babysitters on standby 24/7, huh?
Yeah.
Hey, that was gonna be a celebration in Fanya. When I get back tonight, we know they said just the two of us.
Yeah? It's a date.
I will see you tonight. Enjoy.
Bye-bye.
You don't want to let baby go.
My argument with the screening of these videos is that there has been a lack of representation of queer masculinity in the South African media context. The feminized and flamboyant form of queer masculinity is the form that has been dominating South African media, as illustrated in the first video by GC. In the past, other forms, such as those illustrated by Senzo and Jason, the second video, was shown, but as society has become more liberal, media has shifted towards a theatricalized and entertaining form of queer masculinity. So I'll be posing another question to the class. What stood out in these videos? Can I get a show of hands? Gillian? Oh, okay. Yes, let me just. Oh, wow. Okay, and I think that's important because it's not within the South African context only, it's within the American context as well. Queen Jonah Faye.
I personally perceive the one holding the baby as like more feminine, and so I thought it was interesting how like what I perceived as more masculine man, he wasn't like dealing with the baby either, like he wasn't dealing with the baby the same way, and he seemed a lot more motherly, like his dad. He seemed a lot to have a little bit of motherly qualities, and he's like more feminine. So I thought that was interesting.
Okay, thank you for that. I actually didn't notice that. So as you might have noticed, the first video being portrayed, the very first video of Uzalo is the one that is often being portrayed in media, which has a common theme of theatricalization, whereby queer masculinity is performed in such a way that it's meant to be entertaining. According to Mona Mode, there's an ongoing struggle for representation in South African media, especially for minority groups such as queer individuals. Even with the current visibility of queer masculinity, there are still many gaps in terms of how queer masculinity is represented. With these current representations, as described by Padva, as theatricalized and eroticized, we have to ask ourselves, what message is the media disseminating? Are the media saying that there's only one form of queer masculinity, or that it only exists as being useful or means something in society when it is overrepresented? In conclusion, this lecture hopes to convey that representation in South African media is not an accurate account of queer masculinity, and that it is constructed in relation to hegemonic masculinity. The current representations is, however, a form of queer masculinity, but not the only form, as illustrated by Senzo and Jason. And then lastly, multiple queer masculinities exist. Okay, so just came back. Okay, thank you. Oh. Okay, and then just going back to my research focuses on the liberalization and act of commodifying Black queer masculinity in South African media. It speaks of the continuity and change that queer masculinity has undergone as society has become more liberal, and also how this change has shifted towards commodifying Black queer masculinity. The lecture specifically addresses the concepts and theme of difference that I'll be touching on in my research. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Our second presenter for the day will be Professor Brown Gaines.
Yay.
Okay.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is this okay? This microphone? Okay. My name is Jacqueline Hazel Brown Gaines. I'm from Spelman College, and I'm originally from Los Angeles, California. Today, I will be talking to all of you about Black women and their history with respectability politics. You know, my little subtitle is Can't Live With Them, Can't Live Without Them. Trigger warning, of course. There's some light discussion surrounding sexual violence, sexual assault, and violence. So by the end of these 15 minutes with me, you will know the history of respectability politics, what purpose that respectability politics serve and served, what respectability politics are, excuse that, critiques of respectability politics, how they can be helpful and harmful to Black women specifically, what role respectability politics play in today's societies, and how to navigate them in the 21st century. So what I want to do is open up a question is, what are some, well, when respectability politics is said, what comes to your mind? Anyone? Yes, Autumn?
Ways and forms of dress.
Yes, Queen?
W.B. Du Bois.
Can you elaborate on that?
I feel like he has something to contribute to the conversation of politics during his time.
Okay, so what I have come up with is respectability. Dr. Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham coined the term in 1993 in her book called Righteous Discontent, the Women's Movement in the Black Baptist Church from 1880 to 1920. She is a Victor S. Thomas Professor of African and African American Studies at Harvard University, and she called it the politics of respectability. And she said that the politics of respectability emphasized reform of individual behavior and attitudes both as a goal in itself and as a strategy for reform of the entire structural system of American race relations. So that's pretty meaty, and you know, over the course of this presentation, we'll definitely break that down. So what I have come up with is that respectabilities can range in a variety of different things in regards to black women. It can refer to telling women how to act. So being prim, sexually chaste, trying to align our ideals with white womanhood in order to be taken seriously. You can think of the ways in which we tell women how to think. Their purpose in regards to black women, of course, is to uplift the race and dispel myths of sexualized black women. You can tell them to dress nicely so that they'll be taken seriously again. Peaceful protesting in the attempt to not be seen as rowdy and everything. Also, to do what police say when you come into contact with them. Yes. Okay. So that's a question that I posed to the audience: is do these women look respectable, and what makes you think they look that way? Yes, Sylvia. Okay. Yes. Yes. Anyone else? Yes.
Their hair in a certain way.
Yes. Can you elaborate?
So from what I can see, none of them would have like their natural hair texture. It's probably like perms or some type of.
Yes. Very important. Yes. Yes, Ramari?
All of them sit the same way, and it's very conservative.
Yes, that's what I was going for sure. Definitely a ladylike appearance, aligning with prim, sexually chaste, again, like I said before. So, I argue that. So, where do these ideals come from? There's no rule book on how to be a woman or how to act as a lady or whatever. So where do they come from? Historians have argued that they come from the Black church. The Black church, family members, generations of survival tactics coming through other people. I know, for example, at my church or different churches throughout the South, there's this idea of covering your shoulders and, you can't show anything above your knees, things like that. Does anyone have any other experiences with the Black church? Yes, Marie.
Okay, so I go to a Pentecostal church, and in my church, the women always wear skirts or dresses, and they're long. And so whenever a woman comes in and her skirt or dress is not to a certain length, one of the ushers will hand her a handkerchief and just run her that way. So
That's wild. Yes, Spencer, I know you saw.
I know that that's true for ministerial stuff. So at my church, the pulpit is lifted. So if you're a woman sitting on the pulpit, you have to have something over your knees because they're saying that people can look right up your
That's a lot. That is so much. Yes, yes. Things, just passed down. There's no really rhyme or reason why. Well, there is a reason, and I will get to that. So, it also, I argue, can come from different schools. So this is Spelman College students. This is one of our famous pictures. And it's from 1964. And Spelman College was founded, of course, to educate black women. Spelman College in Atlanta, Georgia, right here. And same ideal of the crossing of the legs, the slim posture. I was talking to India yesterday, and she was saying, look at how all of their backs are straight. You see how they're on a pole. You know how hard that is to sit on a pole and do all that? So, yes. And then these are 3 Howard women, distinguished. I couldn't find where this picture came from, but you can see their very delicate, soft appearance. Okay. So what is the purpose of all this? What is the purpose of policing women, telling them how to act, telling them what to do, all of this? So, with Dr. Sarah H. Case, who is the author of Leaders of Their Race, she argues that for black women, respectability was about defying and overcoming stereotypes of all black women as sexually aggressive and generally uncouth. Black female respectability was not only a private attribute, but also a way of demonstrating the worthiness of black women as a whole and the readiness of African Americans as a group for full citizenship rights and privileges. When the purpose of respectability politics were to dispel these Jim Crow era stereotypes against black women. The Sapphire, which was an angry, hostile, aggressive, naggy type woman. We still are familiar with these stereotypes today. and then also the Jezebel, the overly sexualized, sexually promiscuous, lacking in virtue, and the whole idea of portraying black women, or respectability politics portraying black women as sexually chaste, is to dispel this, because this stereotype specifically justified the commonplace rapings of black women during Jim Crow era segregation in the first half of the 20th century. So now we ask the question, do these respectability politics actually work? So Damon Young, who is the editor-in-chief of the website Very Smart Brothers, describes respectability politics as what happens when minority or marginalized groups are told or teach each other that in order to receive better treatment from the group in power, they must behave better. This is not exactly the case, because, he argues, it can lead to class oppression, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, etc. For example, telling lower class women that they're not worthy of respect because they can't dress a certain way, they don't act a certain way, they don't have these different attributes. It also, this is the most important part to me, is that it relieves the dominant power of the responsibility that they're perpetrating. So instead of telling people, the people in power not to shoot people, you're telling people not to get shot. It argues that it's a false sense of security for those who believe in it. People get lynched in suits all the time, or did get lynched all the time in suits. And then this is one of my, this is an example of, this is from 2016, the protest of the killings of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. And this is Aisha Evans. She was up there protesting, and see, she looks graceful, respectable. She's dressed in a long dress, modest, all these things, but look, she's still, arrested, and she was held overnight at the prison nearby. Gender Talk, which is a book by the previous president of Spelman and Dr. Beverly Guy Sheftall. They were talking about the ways that they were talking about their experiences with domestic abuse and violence in their relationships, and they said that what we learned is that every woman is a potential victim of abuse and betrayal, regardless of her status, level of maturity, or the care with which she chooses a particular partner. So both of them had relationship issues, really serious relationship issues, and they thought before that because they were so well versed in theories and literature that they would be able to sort of be able to wean, bad men out and everything. But then they realized that they were just as subject to it because it just isn't their fault. So it seems like it's not really, respectability politics are not exactly the most ideal thing to go to do, So what do we do about it? So this is the lovely Dr. Brittany Cooper. She is an associate professor of women and gender studies and Africana studies at Rutgers University. She coined this term called disrespectability politics, which is not entirely throwing out of respectability politics, but it's a middle ground between respectability and disrespectfulness. So basically, because she argues that we should respect the ways that our ancestors navigated through their problems, but she also realizes that it's not exactly flaw-free. Ooh, excuse me. So she argues that there's two ways of going about disrespectability politics in this concept called ratchet radicalism. So this is Beyonce, and she cites Beyonce as being unapologetically black in the way that she has her music and her lyrics, and basically repositioning the white gaze, she says, and bringing blackness, black culture, and the unapologetic being of herself into white spaces such as Coachella, and forcing them to deal with it, basically. And then there's this other way that I think will be a little bit more relevant to us, as we've discussed throughout this program. How do we kind of navigate through the academy with, having to act a certain way, but then still staying true to our values? And so she cites Michelle Obama as the calm and subtle disrespectability. And she, this is, our favorite 45's president-election, and, Michelle Obama. It's kind of not clear right here, but her hair was thrown together, and the whole entire time she was just not about this, and she was just but this is her way of just being I don't care, and this is how I'm showing that although I'm here, I'm not here. So in conclusion, respectability politics, although flawed, have helped our ancestors in the fight for full citizenship. Although they can be limiting, it is up to us to learn from the past and tailor them for our needs in the 21st century. And it is important not to throw them out entirely, as they can be used in an ethical and political way, and that includes not oppressing, people in our own ways. That includes doing them the way you see fit and not judging other people the way that you do it. Yes, thank you.
Will be by Professor Cannon.
Oh. Good morning, everybody. How y'all doing today? Good. It's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. Got my PhD as of 2 seconds ago. So today I'm going to be talking about the racialization of, what's that word? Nuyorican. So by a show of hands, who has heard this word? You've heard it? Okay, that's great. Okay. I'm just going to break it down for those who haven't heard it before. We're going to do a little phonetic transcription of the word real quick just so we can, just so that we can all be on the same page. Oh, let's not do that. Okay. So it's just new, yo, re, can, right? So New Yo sounds like New York if you say it with an accent. Can is referring to Puerto Ricans, all right? So I'm going to start off with the objectives. So hopefully, by the end of this presentation, I want you all to understand who Nuyorican are and their history with the United States, be able to understand how the black-white racial dichotomy of the United States has been imposed on Nuyorican, and have a surface-level understanding of how their language can be and has been racialized. All right. So just for those that don't know, that's Puerto Rico right there. Like, it's a little island. It's actually pretty amplified in this picture. You can see DR, Haiti, Cuba, and you see the little Florida on the top over there, just so you have an idea of where it's at. The people on this island, it's very tiny, but it's densely populated. The people here refer to themselves to Puerto Ricanos, which is English for Spanish for Puerto Rican, or Boricuas, or both, synonymous. So, who are Nuyorican? Depicted above, well, to my left, is a group of Nuyorican around the 70s. They are people of Puerto Rican descent who have been raised in New York. The phonetic transcription and breakdown of the word alludes to that. It can also be applied to Puerto Ricans who have spent a significant amount of time in New York and have acclimated to the culture. So in terms of like the etymology of this word, variations of the word such as Neo-Rican or Nuyoriqueño trace back to roughly around the 60s. It was used by Puerto Ricans as a derogatory term to differentiate those from the island from people of Puerto Rican descent. Nuyorican, such as Miguel Algarín, who was the founder of, one of the founders of the Nuyorican Poets Cafe in Lower East Side Manhattan, have reclaimed the word and has become a staple or an identity for many Nuyorican or Puerto Ricans in New York. So something I want to emphasize here is that there's no one look. Like you see this look black, also looks black, maybe white. I don't know what's going on in this picture. Like there's nothing that you can't really pinpoint what a Nuyorican looks like, and in fact you can't pinpoint what a Puerto Rican looks like. So I just want to emphasize the diversity in this picture. So we're gonna have a Puerto Rico 101 class crash course right now because it's essential to understanding what I'm going to be telling you. So these are the main points I'm going to be touching on, so just bear with me. Okay, so in 1898, the Spanish lost Puerto Rico to the United States. So after the Spanish-American War, the United States helped Puerto Rico gain independence from Spain, and they took control of the island. There was a lot that went on after that. But one of the main issues was that Puerto Ricans thought that they were going to be granted independence. Like, they thought that the United States was going to help them and then set them free. But as we know, the United States doesn't like doing that. So many Puerto Rican nationalists actually met with different members of Congress asking for their freedom, but the United States refused. So then, instead of independence, they were met with the Jones Act of 1917, where they were forced and imposed on U.S. citizenship. they were now able to travel back and forth between the island without a passport. And this happened right before World War I, where many Puerto Ricans served. So then, a lot of history after that. And then we go into the 1940s when we have the industrialization of the island under Operation Bootstrap. It industrialized much of the island. While this seemed like it was good because they were rebuilding roads and building schools and everything looked wonderful from the outside, it affected many working class agricultural people and left them without an income. This then led to the Gran Migración, or Puerto Rican Great Migration of the 1950s, where many Puerto Ricans were solicited into taking jobs in the north. But, and I quote, people did not decide to leave Puerto Rico because an array of options beckoned them to New York. Rather, they were recruited for and channeled toward specific jobs and specific industries at specific levels, and these defined the class of worker and the class structure of the migration process. So, fun fact, Puerto Rico is still a colony to this day right now. So, where are they now? In New York. I already talked about that. But, so they're in New York. So this is a breakdown of where you can find Puerto Ricans of the 5 boroughs of New York City. So Bronx, Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Queens. So out of the entire population of that borough, 21%, for example, in the Bronx, is Puerto Rican. Yes. So we're going to start getting into the racialization. So can I have a volunteer from the audience to read this Urban Dictionary? Christoph. Sorry.
A person of Puerto Rican descent who was born and raised in New York City and drapes himself or herself in Puerto Rican flags but can't speak Spanish or speak Spanglish, which is just as bad as my place. Despite proclaiming pride in Hispanic heritage through superficial means, the Puerto Rican flag, eating rice and beans and other staple Puerto Rican dishes, the New Rican actually frowns upon Hispanic culture and aligns himself or herself with hip-hop culture instead.
I don't know who hurt this. This person's obviously hurt. So, so what are some of the implications that you can get off of like this, you know, let me not even say, what do you get grasping from this quote, from this definition?
Isn't authentic backgrounds.
What's up for you? Yeah?
I think it also touches upon a larger issue of their Hispanic identity, the theme of whether or not you know Spanish is very significant.
Also the idea of people wanting to align themselves with like a certain group only when it's convenient for them. And like they're the fun parts like the food, the flag and all that, but then not when it actually comes time to be a Puerto Rican person.
Oh, I'm gonna take Frankie last thing.
Also, like tying to what JC was saying, how like that if you don't speak Spanish, they're also tying into the other bigger picture, which is the hip hop culture. How Puerto Ricans can somehow not be black, because that's hip hop black culture. We just say that, and saying that if you're Hispanic, you have to align yourself with just being Hispanic, speaking Spanish, eating certain things, but you can't be black and you can't be American. I don't know.
Right. No, yeah, that's definitely one of the big takeaways from this quote is the anti-blackness encoded in the wording. So instead of, you could literally take out hip-hop culture and put black culture right there. And then that would be a more blatant racist statement. But, you know, how race works nowadays is not that obvious. So you can see anti-blackness, prejudice, cultural hierarchy. So moving on. So history begins to highlight why they have been racialized as they have been. During the Puerto Rican Great Migration, the African American Great Migration was happening as well. They were after the same jobs and ended up in the same neighborhoods together where they shared socioeconomic status and living conditions. And that is a large portion of why I provided so much history and context. So another quote I want to include is the process of colonization establishes racializing conditions. So can I get another volunteer real quick to read this? Yeah, go ahead, Anna.
The racialization refers to the definition as a racial group in the denigration of the alleged physical and cultural characteristics such as phenotype, language, and number of children. The racialization also entails the incorporation into a white-created and white-imposed racial hierarchy and continuum. White Americans at the very top
So that's the definition of racialization I'm pretty much using here because New Yorkers are Latinos. So pretty much the quote above shows you how New Yorkers have been racialized. They, as I said before, they landed in predominantly African American neighborhoods where they shared similar working conditions. They were alienated and painted as quote unquote microbes and animals, and they all appear to form non-societies whose members must be controlled. So in the next slide, I'm going to provide a spoken word piece. And I just want you to, I'm including this so that you can see how New Yorkers have not only been racialized by white people, but other racialized groups as well.
What I told you, you black, my brother. Damn, I ain't even that black, and here I am suffering from the young black man's plight, the old white man's burden, and I ain't even black man. A black man, I'm not, ain't never really was black like me. Leave that boy alone. He got what they call the niggerican blues. He a spick, he a nigga spick, you just like a nigga, neglected, rejected, oppressed, and dispossessed from banana boats to tenements, and street gangs to regiments. Spick, you ain't no different than a nigga. Thank you.
And I just realized I skipped a part, so I'm just gonna go back real quick and just, okay. I'm just gonna talk about this, this man up here that I realized I didn't talk about, forgive me. But basically he was part of the Young Lords, which is the Puerto Rican version of the Black Panther Party, and some quote that he said that I thought was also very related to the racialization of New Yorkers. He said, before they call me a spick, they call me a nigga. So, and for like, as in the video you saw, spick is a derogatory term for Hispanics in the United States. Okay, now back on track. All right, so as I come to a close, I wanna leave you with a picture of present day New Yorkers. This was in the 2017 New York Day Parade, or Puerto Rican Day Parade, same thing. Same diversity. No, this man black is also black, maybe white, same thing going on. So after all this information, I want to emphasize how racialization also applies to language, which ties into my research, which I haven't been able to really unpack, but that's because I feel like a lot of the history and the racialization was something that I need to emphasize before I can even talk about language. So New Yorkers speak English, Spanish, and as you remember from the Urban Dictionary Hurt Person quote, Spanglish. There is this sentiment that Puerto Ricans' language is wrong or different, which is reinforced by lived experiences. But these lived experiences are not simply about grammar, words, and sounds. And I quote, most of that experience is about information barriers, who controls what one needs to know, and what one must do or say to be understood. At the end of the day, New Yorkers are seen as not white. And in the US, the white is equated to English speaking and of European descent. I quote, it is no accident that the Spanish and English of Puerto Ricans and the English of African Americans are often said to be bastardized. Language varieties that evolved in colonized circumstances are unprotected from judgment unless and until they are proved for example, an elite language academy representing a nation state. Their language, in essence, has been racialized as not white and othered. And also, I want to emphasize that New Yorkers tend to learn their English from African Americans. So this adds another racial component to the equation of language. This is part of the reason why that person from Urban Dictionary, they said they act more black, even though they didn't say that they act more black. That's what it came down to, hip hop culture. So to close, New Yorkers can check multiple boxes. They have been chastised by Puerto Ricans, by the white majority, and have been forced to fit into certain molds to function in society. Thank you.
Sir Cassamajor.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Cassamajor, theater performance major at Morehouse College. First and foremost, I just want to say thank you so much for everyone who's been up here boosting me, reaffirming me. This is a great space for me to do this presentation, and I'll be remiss if when I sit in your seats that if I don't do the same, please call me out on it, all right? All right, so getting right into it. I'm doing an introduction to performance studies. This is my major. It derives from theater. And I think it's very fitting. I'm the only fellow who is performance majors. And I always get the question of what performance studies actually is. Now, I think it's beautiful that with the presentation that you have been doing, you've been talking about performativity, with the performance of respectability politics and how you were saying, oh, when you went up there, you weren't performing. I was like, oh, great, I'm going to tie that into mine, because that's exactly what performance studies is. It is essentially, for me, and this is going to be a lens coming from my interpretation of what it is and what I've been researching, what I've been talking about, and pretty much how I talk about it. But let's go straight into it. Before I go into like the history of it and where the genesis of it, here's a couple terms I'll be using. Performance, it is an action that is not for the first time. Now, we may have daily routines, we may get up, brush our teeth, and do things of that nature, but I think it's very important to note that we never exactly emulate those tendencies and those actions that we do. So as you can see, any action that follows this paradigm is performative, and this pretty much, this coincides with pretty much everything we do within our daily endeavors. Also, I'll be talking about play a little bit, and I will give an example of play. And this is pretty much spontaneous or, this unexpected, it's like improvisation, if you will. Also, you'll hear me say like interdisciplinary, because that's what performance studies is. It encompasses a lot of things. It comes from ethnography, historical analysis, sociology, theater arts. All of this is within performance studies. And I won't talk a lot about liminal, but I will give an example of what it is. Essentially, this is a space where a ritual is taking place, and you're not necessarily, you're in this space of like you're trying to get to, or you're trying to get to after this point. So I guess to give an example or to contextualize this, we're in MMUF, right? So the space we're in right now is the liminal space. Pretty much what this encompasses is you're not before. This is pretty much like the pre-ritual and after ritual. Pre-ritual, after ritual. So this is moving day, and this is this Friday. We're in this space right here. That makes sense. I apologize if that was a little confusing. All right. All right. So let's just get into the history of it. So performance studies, it essentially came from Victor Turner. He's an ethnographer and a researcher, and Richard Schechner. I'll briefly talk about these two scholars, but we're looking back at their work and the field work and the groundwork that they did. Is Victor Turner, he was researching this the Dembu tribe in Zambia, which is in South Central Africa. And he was looking at the street painters in medieval China, and he essentially saw a theatrical potential in social life. And what that pretty much means is that he saw life as much more than you're just, going about your day. He's like, I see a lot of theatrical elements in this. Oh, they're doing this in a certain way, and I want to interrogate as to why they did that. And Richard Schechner, he pretty much met up with him, and they did a conference on ritual and performance. I think it's important to note that before performance studies really became established, they were looking at this from a lens of an anthropological and theatrical thought. So they were looking at anthropology, and they saw theater, and they was like, oh, these two coincide a lot. So let's and they saw that through rituals in a lot of cultures with those. And so performance studies, one thing I like to say is it's a global discipline. It's not necessarily something that's pertinent to just one culture or to one lifestyle, but it is encompasses of us all. So I'll tie it into this quote by Richard Schechner. There is no finality to performance studies, either theoretically or operationally. There are many voices, themes, and methods and subjects. Anything and everything can be studied as performance. And so that's what I'm going to go into, because with performance studies, it's a lot of criticism. It's a lot of, this isn't definite. What are you talking about? And it's like, no, we're in academia, and it's a lot of these things. Like, it's very direct. But when it comes to performance studies, we can go up, and we can go down, and we can also go in the middle. And we're just interpreting all of that, which goes into my next point. One of the reasons I'm so avid about performance studies and why I really wanted to introduce this is because with those within this field of performance studies, they're typically activists, organizers, visual artists, those involved in the avant-garde, and that's essentially what I do as well. So I'll just do this little diagram of, it's not a good marker. But essentially what I'm going to be writing is what performance studies actually it encompasses art, activism, these markers are boo-boo, and academia, okay? Academia. And so my aim for this presentation, if you get anything from what in the world is he talking about? He's talking about a lot of this. No. Essentially, what performance studies encompasses, you can be an artist. You can show about art. You can talk about all of this. You can be an activist, doing the grasswork, you know, the work, doing the groundwork, doing the field work, but also tying that to academia. So like what Professor Cannon did earlier with tying all of this, like you said, bringing it back down to a level where a lot of people don't have that access to, you know, these graduate resources. That's essentially what performance studies is for me. And yeah, you'll see that a lot with the scholars within this field. A lot of the work they're doing is tied to asking these questions that's very much so applicable within our lives, and also kind of looking at it from a lens of like, it's not necessarily surface level. We're always, performance studies scholars are always looking below the surface, always interrogating, oh, you're seeing this, but I want to see the other side of that. You know what I'm saying? So why study performance? Richard Schechner has outlined 7 functions of performance. It's to entertain. You know, it comes from, it derives from theater. It comes from a lot of the play stuff, but it's also to make something that is beautiful. I think that's very important, because when it comes to a lot of this, we do a lot of, it's very rigorous, and sometimes it can be to the point where it's kind of harsh, but this kind of brings to life like, no, this is actually a very beautiful thing, and this not understanding it and being a little open to interpretation, it makes it a great, and that it's just beautiful. To mark or change identity. So this is pretty much to give an example. No, I won't give an example. But to pretty much to mark or change identity, it's pretty much saying, okay, so you'll see something. For example, you'll see me in like a Morehouse shirt. But to mark or change that identity and studying that performance of Morehouse, that's essentially like what that bullet point makes. To make or foster community, another reason I love doing this, because with the work that I'm doing, with the research that I'm doing with this, I plan on making this into a theater documentary project and like going back into the community, making talkbacks, and pretty much advocating like youth empowerment and how to be really an advocate and politically aware within your respective community. That's what I plan on doing with my entire research as a whole. And to heal, that's, yeah, it's pretty much saying with the things that we see, a lot of the oppressions and, you know, the things that we deal with on a day-to-day, performance studies kind of analyzes like, okay, you've run it from this and you experienced this, but when you view it from a lens of performance and kind of interrogate, okay, this is why it happened, and really breaking it down, this is why that happened, that's when the healing process starts. Now, I know I'm being very vague, but I'll give an example very shortly. To teach, persuade, or convince, yeah, performance, you're going to do a lot of talking, man. You would think it's more in physicality, but it's also in your verbal, also in your, you know, your written work, things of that nature. You can perform in many ways, and to deal with the sacred and the demonic. So this comes from a lot of the, with the rituals and things I was talking about earlier, that's where that derives from. Performance is very traditional, and it comes from a lot of cultures. And another quote I like to use is, cultures are often most fully expressed in their performances. Performance studies hopes to comprehend and explain what such behaviors might indicate about the individual, group, or culture that enacts them. All right, so before I get into my central lesson, let's see how much time I got. I'm going to give an example of play, like I mentioned earlier. So a little bit of context about this. Before I went to Morehouse College, I worked at Duke University in the Keenan Institute of Ethics. And there I was the co-producer and co-director of this theater documentary project called the Bull City Dignity Project. And essentially what we did is we went out in the community. We interviewed a lot of people ranging from, they were policymakers, teachers, who's been in Durham for how long, national activists. And we took those interviews, transcribed them, and made it into a play. And we actually performed those plays and then had to talk back about like, oh, this is like the story of Durham, or what did you know about this space that you inhabit? Which is, again, tying it back, this is what I want to do with my research as a whole. And so this piece comes from Lamont Lilly. He's a national activist. And yeah, I'm just going to get straight into it. Can someone give me a lights up? I hate the zoos. I do not go to zoos. I do not support zoos. I took my goddaughter to the circus a couple years ago, but I don't support the circus either. The reason being is the circus and the zoo for a lion or an elephant is just like America for the black man and woman. It is. It very much so is. Number one, they are totally out their natural habitat. They do not belong in a circus or a zoo. They don't belong there. Number two, what you did at a very early age when the elephant was this high, you put that elephant on a chain. You put that elephant on a chain. You put the elephant's neck on a chain when he or she was this high. Now, the elephant at this point in time, it's a baby. The chain is stronger than it. But then you train the elephant to be an act, to be a minstrel show. You do the same things for lions and tigers for tricks. You teach them to teach your orders, to assimilate to your way of life. Now, on the chain, the elephant and the lion learn psychologically, I am trapped now. I cannot escape. There's no way I can survive except to entertain and to do what I'm taught to do. But there's something in their spirit all along. You know how you hear about the lions and tigers that snap and bite off the keeper's arm? Well, good. Good. You should have never had that lion in the cage in the first place with your arm in its mouth. You deserve to have it bitten off. But the thing is, when the animals get to be this big, this high, they no longer need a chain. They need a rope because psychologically they've been programmed since the time that they were little. The slightest tug. The slightest tug is all the reminder it needs that's captive in the circus or the zoo. The slightest tug. But again, they've been programmed psychologically and emotionally and spiritually as well. And we're very much so the same way in America. The world looks at black people in the U.S. as survivors. But we don't even know our power because we've been conditioned and seen. So essentially, what that was, I do this piece to say really two things. When it comes to performance studies, it's possible to tie in your art, doing a monologue of that nature, but also talking about the substance of that art. We're talking about the activism of it. Because when we're looking at how we go about our everyday, and you really want to interrogate what we actually do and like really thinking about, oh, wow, I go to the circus, I go to the zoo, but it means more than that because when we talk about, liberation, we talk about black studies in America, they used to have African Americans, enslaved peoples in those cages, in those circuses. And now we're doing the same thing. You know, it's different with the animals, right? You would think it's different, but it's much more deeper meaning than that. And so this goes into my lesson. I'm going to talk about, this is pretty much the primary perspectives of performance studies. So we're going to talk about the object of analysis, lens for social and cultural phenomena, and the research method. Now, to briefly explain, object of analysis, this essentially, you're analyzing the object. So for this example, we'll be analyzing the lion or the elephant. So pretty much we're interrogating, why does this lion perform in the way it did? Why did this lion choose to bite off this zookeeper's arm in this moment? Why did this lion, eat his food right here, choose to go right here, nap in this day, and performs in this way where the zookeeper is like, oh, I'm more comfortable now where I don't have to hold my tranquilizer or holster. Oh, I've seen this lion and this elephant perform in a way where when I go into the cage, I can actually feel comfortable putting my arm in his mouth. The object of analysis with performance studies is viewing that performance of the animal, but also of the zookeeper, and saying what was the nerves of the zookeeper at first when his first interaction with this animal, and how has it came through, with that timeline. Now, lens for social and cultural phenomena. This is the bigger picture. So, like I was saying earlier, how, and at least from my experience in this country, how we view the aquariums and the circuses and the zoos, but actually putting it in the context of saying, oh, have you thought about it from this perspective? And pretty much saying the performance of that, and you really want to interrogate those systems of like how this came about and how whatever people go to it, why they go to these circuses and zoos, and like what's the actual purpose, and and doing that. And with the research method, this is essentially getting to the work and really telling of how it did it. So for example, our research method could be movement analysis. Once again, talking about the performance of the lion and talking about the performance of the zookeeper, but seeing in what way did that lion and elephant perform when it was small, when it was on the chain, when it was here, where it's like, okay, now it can actually make the transition to the rope, right? So you're looking at the research and saying, how did this animal move, and you're just really breaking it down from that. So how did I want to do this? We're going, matter of fact, in closing, because I'm at 14:30. See, you gotta be smart, you gotta have your time up here, y'all. In closing, I just want to leave you with this. When we leave here and we perform in the way we do and we go out and we talk about our scholarship, have fun with your scholarship, right? And when you're performing, like, be cognizant of how you're doing it. When you go up the aisles, what's your purpose for doing that? Really interrogate why you're doing something. Always stand in your truth. One thing I always ask myself, is this real or is this fake? Like, really, is this real or is this fake? When it comes to performance studies, you really have to ask yourself, am I standing in my truth? Am I staying true to my convictions and my moral compass? Or am I performing this for, a greater cause or not? Just staying true to who you are, all right? And here's my works cited. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Chimeka-Tisdale. I'm a rising junior at Spelman College. I use they, them pronouns. And today with this teaching demonstration, I'll be seeking to answer the question, what does it mean to think queerly? So my objectives for this presentation are to provide a genealogy of the word queer, to define queerness as a philosophy, and by discussing queerness as a philosophy, I will elaborate on the ways that queerness can be used as a way of producing knowledge and understanding the world around us. I will also seek to provide examples of how we can think queerly. Okay, so this is a question for the audience. I'll take some hands, but what does it mean when you guys hear the word queer? What's the first thing that comes to mind? Julian?
I think about thinking differently.
Okay. Autumn?
Disruptive or non-normative.
Okay.
Thinking out of the binary.
Okay, and one more? What's that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So thank you. All of those responses are correct in one way or another. Historically, the word queer has had numerous meanings, often contradicting themselves. I will briefly outline a genealogy of the word queer, which will provide some context to the definition that I'll be using throughout this demonstration. Okay, so the genealogy of queerness. The first recorded example of the word queer as a slur took place in 1894 by John Douglas, the 9th Marquis of Queensberry. And just some context to this whole historical happening. So Douglas discovered that his son was in a gay relationship with the author Oscar Wilde. He became concerned at the potential of a gay sex scandal and immediately set out to persecute Wilde by any means necessary. So he launched a court case against Wilde. And in it, during this court case, Douglas used the term snob queers as a descriptor of gay men. This established the word queer's reputation as a gay slur. American newspapers jumped onto this use of it as a derogatory term and used it to highlight the fact that homosexuality was strange and abnormal. So then in the 1970s to the 1980s, the word was reclaimed by activists and HIV-positive folks during the AIDS epidemics. So activists joined forces in the late 80s and early 90s to form organizations such as Queer Nation, which was an LGBTQ activist organization founded in March of 1990 in New York City by HIV and AIDS activists. Queer Nations explained their intentions behind reclaiming the word in a leaflet entitled Queers Read This, which was passed out during New York Pride in the 1990s. So a quote from this pamphlet states that, "When a lot of lesbians and gay men wake up in the morning, we feel angry and disgusted, not gay. So we've chosen to call ourselves queer. Using queer is a way of reminding us of how we are perceived by the rest of the world. It's a way of telling ourselves we don't have to be witty and charming people who keep our lives discreet and marginalized. Queer, unlike gay, doesn't mean male." So it shows the broad usage of the word queer and the way that it's been taken up in activist spaces and to be used as a personal identity. And the main way that I'll be using queer throughout this presentation is how it's been used in the academy, and that began in the 1990s as the discipline of queer theory began to develop. Okay, so due to the broad scope of the word queer, I firmly believe that the usage and definition of the word varies greatly from person to person. This is one scholarly definition of the word by Eve Sedgwick. Can I have somebody in the audience read it? Autumn.
Queer in the economy. The ways that race, ethnicity, post-colonial nationality crisscross with these and other identity constituting identity fracturing discourses.
Okay. So in this definition, Sedgwick brings to the forefront the fact that queerness is way broader than sexuality, and it deals with the way that other identities intersect and interconnect with one another. So these are some aspects from my personal definition of queer and how I use it in my personal politics and in my life. So I firmly believe that people of color are always and already queer because we live in a white supremacist state and society. I believe that queerness is outside of the regimes of normal, and then queerness is a reimagining and restructuring of existing normative structures. So these definitions and ideas are how I will be using queer throughout the course of this presentation. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, moving on. Okay, so one of my examples of how we can begin to think queerly about the world around us is by discussing the immigrant children at the United States southernmost border as how we can think about their situation queerly. So here are some questions that we can use when jumping into this. So what are some traits that you all think of when you think of the ideal American citizen? I'll take hands again. Okay. Abraham?
Someone who's very keen on voting.
Okay. Anybody else?
Middle class.
Okay.
White people.
Okay, Spencer.
I was gonna say, I think of white people in like those old Navy shirts with like the American flag on it. So it's like the July ones.
Yeah, okay. So those were all good. So here are some of the things that come to my mind when I think of the ideal American citizen. White, cisgender, male, Christian, and heterosexual. So I'm gonna go back really quickly. And so with those like traits in mind, how are immigrant children, how are they outside of like these regimes of like normalcy? So the ultimate, this is a quote from Mbembe. He states that the ultimate expression of a sovereignty is the production of general norms by a body, the public, made up of free and equal men and women. These men and women are posited as full subjects capable of self-understanding, self-consciousness, and self-representation. So as a nation, the United States has a very specific image of citizenship. Some of the primary aspects are listed here. It has been shown throughout history and in recent years that individuals that fit this image are the only citizens that are treated as human. So individuals that do not align with this image are seen as outside of the state or queer to the state. Since early May, 2,342 children have been separated from their parents after crossing the southern U.S. border as part of a new immigration strategy by the Trump administration. So these children who are outside of this ideal image of the American citizen are being detained and treated in ways that are inhumane and unacceptable. However, the American government justifies their treatment by othering and queering these children. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay. So now I'm just gonna connect this all back to my own research. So these are the three main figures that I'm working with in my research. Ahead Tamimi is a 16-year-old girl who was arrested by Israeli officers in December of 2018 during a night raid of her home in which she assaulted an officer who had shot her cousin the night before. Emma Gonzalez has recently come into the media spotlight as a result of the Parkland shooting in Florida. Gonzalez is one of the youth activists at the forefront of the United States' current conversation surrounding gun violence. Eva Lewis is a student activist from the south side of Chicago. Her work centers discrepancies within the education system of Chicago and seeking to dismantle police brutality. So, throughout my work, So in my research, I explore the social activism of Black and brown girls transnationally. I also examine and analyze how these young girls are taken up and manipulated by global North governments and Anglophone media outlets to uphold regimes of imperial power and reinforce stereotypes around gender, race, class, and religion. So the way that I use queerness in my research is that I argue that these girls, their queerness is one of the primary reasons that they are seen as troublemakers or disruptors of the state. The state and society as a whole has a particular image of what girls should look and act like. At the core of this image are whiteness, femininity, and submissiveness. By disrupting and challenging this image and defining girlhood as they see fit, these girls are challenging the antiquated notions of gender implemented by imperialist powers as a means of oppression and victimization. They're queering their own girlhood. So I hope that this presentation has given all of you ways to define queerness yourself and to think queerly about the world around us. This quote is one of my own personal favorite definitions of the word queer and ways to think about it. So it states, queerness is not yet here. Queerness is an identity. Put another way, we are not yet queer. We may never touch queerness, but we can feel it as the warm illumination of a horizon, imbued with potentiality. We have never been queer, yet queerness exists for us as an identity that can be distilled from the past and used to imagine a future. The future is queerness's domain. Thank you.
You've got a little bit over 10 minutes left.
Oh, wow.
Can you maybe elaborate a little bit on your how this fits into your overall topic?
Yeah, I'm just gonna actually take questions from the audience. Yes, dear.
So, towards the beginning of your presentation, you're showing the 3 times, or the 3 grades of queerness as it's been defined. You used the 1980s and 1970s and 80s, the HIV positive folks. Why do you use an X instead of an KS?
Okay, so it was intentional, and it's just used to be more inclusive of people outside of the cisgender binary, and it's just a more inclusive way of using the word. Autumn.
Thank you. Could you go to the side where you use your own definition of speaking? Yes. Who are you pulling from? What scholars are you or who are you in conversation with when you derive these definitions?
Okay. So some of it is from scholars like Eve Sedgwick, who I cite in here, and then Jose Munoz, who is the last quote that was there, but also Deshaun Harrison. He goes to Morehouse College. He does a lot of work around this, and just my other friends who identify as queer, and we do a lot of thinking around our own identities and ways that the word can be used. Christoph.
Okay, I have a few questions.
Yes.
First one, so with your definition of queer, how do you navigate I guess it's two-sided. Is the majority of the scholarship on queerness, is it encompassing of some of these parts of your definition of queer? And if not, how do you navigate doing the research with your idea of queer that includes people of color or anything that's non-conformative? How do you navigate doing your research with that definition, and another scholar may be defining queer as just something else? So
Okay. So most of the scholars that I've read so far that use queerness as a philosophy do define it in really similar ways to myself. So it's pretty easy. If one scholar doesn't completely align, then another one will. And so using different scholars, I can find sources to back up my own definition.
my other question was, I still was unclear in response to Pierre's question. Were you implying that the KS ink would assume gender in KS?
So not necessarily that it would assume gender, but just that within the queer community, using an X explicitly makes it more inclusive. Does that make sense? Datisha.
I was going to ask if you can go back to your slide when you refer to the scholars that you're using. So
This one?
No, the one with
Oh.
the photograph.
Oh.
Yes. So can you just elaborate a little bit more on them? And I know you touched on why you put them in your research, but why specifically is it that they cater to really what you're trying to prove and argue?
So with my research, I'm looking at these girls and the activist work that they do and thinking about the ways that they're presented by the media and how their presentation is upholding certain stereotypes that the media is already presenting. Does that make sense? So the reason that I picked all of them was very intentional. So I wanted to focus on Black and brown girls specifically, and so 2 of them are brown and 1 is Black. And then I also wanted to make sure I was making it broader than the United States, which is why I have AHEAD. And then I think AHEAD is also really interesting because she's in Palestine, so in the Middle East, and it's interesting how media outlets are taking her up in very different ways than they took up activists such as Malala. So why is AHEAD not being praised or celebrated in the same ways that Malala is? So those are some of the questions that I'm working out with my project. Frankie?
Okay. Again, I don't know. What exactly is your research entailing? What exactly are you researching? And then what is the significance of your work for the Academy or for social norms even?
Okay. So I think this outlines what my research is doing, but I'll just answer the second question about why I think it's important to the Academy. you know? I think there are people that are doing similar work, but I think that a lot of times it's not discussed transnationally, so I think that it's important to think outside of borders, and so I'm trying to do that with my work. Danielle.
Yeah, first of all, you're doing a good job, and
Thank you.
because it's a lot. It's very tough. My question is kind of not fair, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
What is the difference between like a queer identity and like an othered identity? Because it seems like, what is the benefit of using the word queer? That's the first question. And then the second one would be, has there been any resistance to the using of queer outside of sexual and gender norms? Within, I would say within the queer community, but you're expanding that. So has there been resistance to this expanded notion of queer?
Okay. So I'll start with your second question.
There's that too.
What was that?
And is there resistance from the communities that you're also queer?
Okay.
Yeah, okay, so both. So those who are aligning as queer, but those who you are saying are queer based on your definition.
Okay. So there is resistance within the queer community to the reclamation of the word queer because it does have this history as being a slur. But I think that happens whenever marginalized communities reclaim a word. In terms of resistance from communities that I'm saying are queer, I don't know if there's been resistance because I haven't talked to them about this, so I'm not sure. But I should be doing that to make my research accessible. What was the first question?
The first question was why call it
Queer and not other.
Yeah. Or another term.
I don't know.
You don't have to answer now.
Okay, but I'm gonna think about it.
Okay, so let's
Session now, please welcome Professor Mario Putra.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone had a nice lunch because you might want to stay tuned for my teaching session today. So, today I will be teaching you guys about Afrikaans, but in particular the contestation around the history of Afrikaans. The histories of Afrikaans has been told for centuries. However, these histories of Afrikaans has not been reflected completely, which means that some of these histories, they are hidden and they are still untold. So, I will be looking at the hegemonic histories of Afrikaans that has been told and which has been told more often. But I'll be looking at the hidden histories of Afrikaans as well, and that is which I will be focusing on, in particular in this teaching session, to enlighten you guys more about this language and how it developed according to the hidden histories of Afrikaans. So, the reason why I will be focusing on the hidden histories of Afrikaans as well is because the hegemonic histories of Afrikaans has been told for so long, and now society has this idea around Afrikaans. And the hidden histories of Afrikaans will contribute so much more, and it is essential for these histories to see the light of day, and in order to transform the academy, because these hidden histories of Afrikaans will eventually bring diversity into the Academy of Afrikaans as a discipline. So, can I get someone from the audience to read this quote for me? Jacqueline?
In the debate on language and culture, we often hear only the Afrikaner nationalist version of the story of Afrikaans.
Okay, so before I start with the hegemonic history of Afrikaans, I will be explaining what Afrikaner nationalist is and how it has contributed to the hegemonic history of Afrikaans. So, Afrikaner nationalism, it is the political ideology that arose in the late 19th century. it arose because there was so strong anti-British sentiments, and it only grew stronger due to the Boeroorlog. And the Boeroorlog was in December 1818 up until March 1881, and it was between the British and South Africa. And that led to the Afrikaner nationalism arousing, and that led to the establishment of the GRA. And later in the teaching session, I will be explaining what GRA is. So, the hegemonic history of Afrikaans arose as a result of the following factors. The following factors, like I said, Afrikaner nationalism and the propaganda and media. Afrikaner nationalism. So when this whole Afrikaner nationalism arose, it was against the British. And the British usually, they spoke English. So Afrikaner, it basically come from the word Afrikaans, so it arose against that whole British sentiment. Propaganda and media, I will be referring to how it contributed to the hegemonic history of Afrikaans. And as a matter of fact, it still contributes today to the hegemonic history of Afrikaans. And I'll tell you a personal experience which I have experienced recently. So, going back to the beginning of colonial impact in South Africa, the arrival of the VOC. The VOC in Dutch means Verenigde Oost-Indische Company, or in English, the Dutch East Indian Company, which arrived in the Cape in 1652. So this is the first instance of colonial impact. Moving on, the VOC, they are a Dutch company, and like I said, they established the refreshment station in Cape Town. So obviously they are a Dutch company, so Dutch is in the Netherlands, so they're part of Europe, as you can see there. So as they moved from here, like there, and then they traveled along. So as the trading route started, they stopped amongst West Africa, and eventually they came to Cape Town and they established a refreshment station. So moving on to what their goal was, they want to go and trade here in India and the South Indianized Asian countries, as well as the islands of Indonesia. So this was known as the spice route. And the VOC, it's some academics consider it to be the first ever company, because they did trading and they collected slaves and stuff. However, this is just the hegemonic history. You should keep that in mind always. So, the refreshment station that has been established in the Cape, the hegemonic history would create this idea that it was something nice that developed. They create this idea of a marketplace, but it indeed is not so. Like we know, the slave trade, it was a violent situation, and people got murdered, people were kept in captivity. So the hegemonic history, they have a very different picture of this. So they describe it as a marketplace which developed, and the indigenous people, who were the Khoi, they just waltzed into this marketplace and attempted to negotiate with the Dutch, which is not so. They negotiated regarding the issue of land and who can use the land. So it wasn't a marketplace developed, but that is what the hegemonic history is saying. So in the attempts of the Khoi people to speak a non-standard Dutch developed. And as they would describe non-standard Dutch, they would say the non-standard Dutch are the language of the illiterate or the uneducated, simply because these people were not white, and simply because they did not get a formal education in Dutch. And the non-standard Dutch was also used in informal settings. So by the frequent use of this non-standard Dutch and more people speaking the non-standard Dutch, it led to the development of Afrikaans. And remember, this is just the hegemonic history narrative of Afrikaans. Moving on. Another volunteer, please. Can I get Christopher? Oh, yeah.
In the 1870s, the Afrikaner nationalism arose, and it led to the establishment of the...
To me, you can continue. Or the Fellowship of True Afrikaners on 14 August 1875. So, as you can see, the Afrikaner nationalism, it played an important role. So, the GRA, or the Genootskap van Ware Afrikaners, I provided the English translation also. So these people, they came with a mission, and their mission was to convince people speaking Afrikaans, as well as the Dutch, that Afrikaans was the language of the white people. How ironic. So, by doing this, they made it their aim, and it was what they stand for as a movement. So here I provided a definition of what it is, and this is just according to an academic source, Herman Jeremy from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. So how did they go about to convince these people? So they established a newspaper and published a whole newspaper to advertise their message, to bring their message and their aim and their mission across. So this was considered to be the first Afrikaans newspaper. It was published on 15 January 1876, and it obviously, Afrikaner nationalism led to the establishment of the GRA, and remember, Afrikaner nationalism was pro-Afrikaans and anti-British, so that arose interest in this particular newspaper, so the circulation grew. However, it stopped circulation in 1904. So, as you guys see, the brief context I've given you regarding the hegemonic history of Afrikaans, I hope everyone have an understanding, because in order to break the rules, you need to understand them. So by going to the hidden histories of Afrikaans, we will be attempting to create transformation, but definitely bringing diversity. Another, can I have Cohen to read this one?
Afrikaans history is a multifaceted, and many South Africans of MMU have contributed to its formation and development. Further, Afrikaans is primarily the language of poor black people, and by focusing on its hegemonic history only, we forget that part of its long history.
And this was by a non-white scholar from the University of Pretoria back in South Africa. So, as you can see, the language of poor black people, black in this context means non-white, because if you were not white, you were considered to be black in most cases. So, what are the histories that are hidden? So, there are histories that are hidden that is not being told in the hegemonic script, as I've been saying throughout this teaching session. So we have to understand that these histories can be seen as, I would describe them as treasures, because they bring so much value to the history of Afrikaans. So the first one I would like to explain is Arabic text and Arabic scripts written in Cape Dutch. And Cape Dutch is a dialect, or it can be considered a dialect of the first versions of Afrikaans, which I'll elaborate more on. And it was written in koples books. So koples books basically mean kop, which is your head, les, which is a lesson, and book obviously means book. So it's like a book that they read. Also, I will be focusing on the contributions of the indigenous people like the Khoi and the San to Afrikaans, because they mention that these people came in contact with the Dutch, but they do not mention the contributions these people has made to the development of Afrikaans. So, this is the first ever Afrikaans text. It's written in Arabic script, and it is written in the Cape Dutch dialect. The Cape Dutch dialect is a creolized language, and it has influences from languages like Dutch, Portuguese, Indonesian, Malaysian, and obviously the Khoi. And the native language of the Khoi is Kun. That's the language. And Dutch is considered to be one of the earliest forms of Afrikaans. So, going on to this, explaining this text, it is by a student, a Muslim student in a madrasa. A madrasa is an Islamic instruction, Islamic place of instruction, and it is a copy of a prayer, because they prayed, and the Muslims were also considered to be one of the earliest scholars in Afrikaans. So that being said, the Muslim people were also one of the first non-whites to be educated in Afrikaans. So the contribution of the indigenous people like the Khoi and the San to Afrikaans. These are some of the people like the Khoi and the San, just to give you guys an idea of what they look like. So when these people came in contact with the Dutch, if you come in contact, you are going to use your own language and their language. So they did not acknowledge, these people just didn't speak non-standard Dutch. They spoke a language of Kukun and all of the other languages, which created this creolized language. And a creolized language is a stable, natural language developed from a mixture of languages, from two or more groups. And it develops as a means of communication between these groups. And a creolized language is a complete language, and it is used in a community and acquired by children as their native language, which is why I included a picture of the children. So, moving on to give you guys a better understanding of what Afrikaans is and how the hidden histories of Afrikaans get you guys to understand. So the best way I would describe Afrikaans is as a tree. Simply because Afrikaans as a creolized language has its roots in so many different languages, and these are just a few that I've listed, like Portuguese, Dutch, Malaysian, and Indonesian, as I explained through the Arabic script, Kuku and the sun, and that is the contribution of the indigenous people. So if you would see here, Afrikaans as a whole language can be considered as a tree because it has its roots in so many different languages. So in conclusion, my definition of Afrikaans is that it is a language of diversity, it is a language of identity, and most importantly, it is a language of culture, and a culture so rich, and I do not think that a culture so rich should be hidden away by these histories, and it should be reflected in history and society. So stating back to why I feel the hegemonic history should be diversified, because as you guys know, some of you know, the UWC fellows were in New York a few times. So in H&M, some random guy walked up to me and we spoke, and he asked about Afrikaans. So then he said, it's a language that comes from Dutch, yes? So I looked at him and was like, so I just gave him a lesson in H&M regarding about Afrikaans, because then I still see the need for this hidden histories to be exposed to the academic world, so people can get this better understanding of what Afrikaans as a language is and how it developed, and that its main root isn't just Dutch. So, and my research is sociolingualism of contact, because I will be focusing on the contact made between these different languages and how Afrikaans developed from these languages, and I will also problematizing language ideologies like the standard language ideology and the hierarchy language ideology. Thank you so much for listening to me, and I hope you enjoyed the presentation.
Let's welcome Professor Aaliyah Collins.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. So, my name is Dr. Aaliyah Collins, and today I will be identifying the various theoretical foundations that make eco-womanism. So my objective for this presentation, or this teaching, for my teaching today, I will define eco-womanism. I will analyze the various theoretical foundations. Well, I will analyze 3 specific theoretical foundations. There are various foundations, but I'm only going to address 3, which is ecofeminism, womanist thought, and African American religious thought. Okay, can I get a volunteer to read the first definition? Dom.
Eco-womanism, an approach to environmental justice that is centered around the perspectives of African and African American women. It often reflects upon their activist methods, religious practices, and theories that concern earth justice.
Can I get someone to read the second one? Okay, 2 weeks, sorry.
It is an interdisciplinary discourse in womanist thought that reflects upon the religious orientations and relationships that women of color have with the earth.
Yes, so eco-womanism is an approach to environmental justice. It's a theological framework. It's a way to look at and analyze the relationship that African and African American women have with the environment, with nature, and their own spirituality. I'll be using the perspective of Dr. Melanie Harris, who is also a Spelman alumni for all the Spelmanites here. She is the founding director of African American and Africana Studies at Texas Christian University. And with eco-womanism, which is a fairly new discourse, she is trying to expand and further develop this particular discourse. So the origins of eco-womanism, they were introduced into scholarly discourse by several people, but I will examine or highlight Pamela Smith and her essay Green Lap, Brown Embrace, Blue Body, the Eco-Spirituality of Alice Walker, and Shantu Riley in her essay Ecology is a Sisters Issue Too, The Politics of Emergent Afrocentric Eco-Womanism. So next I will address or highlight the influence that Alice Walker has on eco-womanism. So Alice Walker coined the term womanism, and she coined the term to make sure that when we talk about feminism, when we talk about the feminist movement, that it's not become an idea of white, that is also inclusive of women of color, African American, and African women. So many scholars consider Alice Walker an eco-womanist writer through her literature, and she's notable for The Color Purple. How many people seen The Color Purple? Good, good, great. So with The Color Purple, I am going to highlight Shug Avery within The Color Purple. Is anybody, who's all familiar with Shug Avery? Okay, so just in case people aren't, she is a particular person within The Color Purple that a lot of scholars acknowledge that you can see eco-womanism through her character in the book and in the movie. So, so through this clip, I'm going to show is the way that Shug Avery interacts with the environment. So as I play this clip, I ask you to become cognizant of the dialogue, the setting between nature, between the two individuals, the two women. So as I play this, I guess the lights. More than anything, God love admiration. You saying God is vain? No, not vain. Just wanted to share a good thing. I think it pisses God off if you walk by The Color Purple in a field and don't notice it.
Are you saying it just won't be loved like it say in the Bible?
Yeah, silly. Everything would be loved. Us sing and dance and holler. Just trying to be loved. Look at them trees. Ever notice how trees do everything to get attention that we do? Except walk. Oh, Miss Celia, feels like singing. Okay, so from watching this clip, what are some things that you noticed? Queen.
That the flowers and trees, they she kind of like personified them. She kind of like gave them like even like characteristics.
Yes. Dartisha?
I noticed that Sugar Avery was very connected with nature and just wanted to impart that
I'm guessing this is Shug Avery, but the fact that Shug is kind of teasing the idea that God and spirituality is related to the flowers, and that God is like upset when people look past that flower and don't see the spirituality in it.
Marie?
Just comparing Shug Avery and Celie, and just the way in which she walked before her, and the way she walked amongst the trees, amongst the grass, amongst the flowers, and how she talked about the earth as it was like moving. So like the way the film was, the flowers were literally swaying, and you can hear the wind in the background, and she just walked so effortlessly, almost as if, you know, like it's doing this because of her presence.
Yes, exactly. So eco-womanism, you can see eco-womanism through this specific clip because eco-womanism also stresses the idea that certain women are divinely connected with the environment, like that is their intimate connection. So, moving along here. So now, I'm going to highlight or touch on the different theoretical foundations that form eco-womanism. So the first theoretical foundation that I will address is ecofeminism, and it combines the study of ecology to feminism. It highlights the ways in which all women and the environment concurrently suffer from oppression. And Françoise Debon wrote in her essay, Feminism or Death, that the survival of humankind on Earth is dependent on changing patriarchal structures and adapting a more feminist views on the community. So I have an example of ecofeminism through, and many ecofeminists believe that the Earth is oppressed and exploited in the same ways in which women are oppressed under patriarchy. And so I have a example that I wanted to show through Avatar. How many are familiar with Avatar? Great film. And so in this particular clip, you'll be able to see Natiri, who's the chief's daughter, her specific relationship with nature and how she connects with nature and how she feels about other people and their reaction with nature.
Look, I know you probably don't understand this, but thank you. Thank you. That was pretty impressive. I would have been screwed if you hadn't come along. Hey, wait a second. Hey, where are you going? Wait up. Just, hey, slow down. I just want to say thanks for killing those things. Ah! Damn!
Don't thank. You don't thank for this. This is sad. Very sad only.
Okay, I'm sorry. Whatever I did, I'm sorry.
All this is your fault. They did not need to die.
My fault they attacked me. How am I the bad guy?
Cut off!
Hey, woo.
So yes. So through this particular clip, that's somewhat differently than the eco-womanist clip that was previously viewed. What can you take away, or what did you get away from this? Jacqueline?
I think she was telling him that, like, the destruction, the death and things are his fault, and she didn't mean it as in him particularly, but like men in general.
Yeah.
And how you like you were saying, how it's oppression and the oppression of like patriarchy, like how they function in the same way.
Christoph?
I'm not sure this is specific to what he wanted us to look, but I think it kind of correlates with what you were originally talking about, how they're connected. You said they're like divinely connected to nature. I don't know if anybody else noticed, but like within the first 2 seconds, for some reason I just looked down instead of like at the main picture, and I noticed that when she took steps, the grass under her feet got lighter color, like there was like a green, and then as she stepped, like the grass like got lighter color wherever her foot. So I thought that was like in accordance to what you were saying, like that divine connection, like it's like the nature wasn't necessarily vibing with the man, but it was very much aware that she was present and that she was moving and it was connected.
Yeah, exactly. So ecofeminism, it highlights all women, how all women are inclusive into their relationship to the environment. So those are really good points when highlighting ecofeminism. So the next theoretical foundation that I will talk about, or just touch on, is womanist thought. So of course, womanism was derived from Alice Walker, and she states that womanism is to feminism as purple is to lavender. So she advocates for feminist movement to be all-inclusive and addresses the racist and classist aspects of white feminism and actively opposes separation of these ideologies. So basically what she's saying is womanism and feminism are the same thing, but when we talk about feminism, we can't forget that African women of color are a part of this movement as well. So the final theoretical foundation that I will touch on is African American religious thought and the elements of African American theological reflection about the relationship between nature and humanity can be gleaned from slave narratives and African American experiences in the South. And a specific text that I will that conveys this is the narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, specifically in the character Sandy Jenkins. So within this story, Frederick Douglass runs away from his plantation, and so during his voyage away from his plantation, he meets a guy named Sandy Jenkins who gives him this sacred tree root that is supposed to defend him and protect him from his slave master when he returns back to his plantation. So when he does return back to his plantation, his master acts like that he never ran away, like nothing ever happened. And so then he begins to believe in the sacred and the divine entity within this tree root and its superiority. In conclusion, so yeah, I got the Tarzan thing going. But eco-womanism is a way to highlight and develop the ideas in which African women, women of color in general, all are connected to the environment, and they all use the environment to develop their spirituality, to negate hierarchical religious structures like Christianity that sometimes have different expectations of what we're supposed to be, but in fact that actually engaging with nature as the divinity is really what eco-womanism is about. So thank you.
Last couple of lessons, trying to maintain the energy because our next presenters deserve it. Also, if you haven't spoken up today, commented on someone's work or someone's presentation, try to do that in these last two sessions, just so it's kind of like a quid pro quo. People will be commenting on you, so you need to comment on them as well. All right, and without further ado, we have Professor Davis.
Awesome. What's going on, everybody? So today we will be focused on the interpretation of the concert spiritual. So before we start, let's talk about what we will be doing throughout the presentation, well, the lesson. So first we need to know what a spiritual is, and so then after that we'll move on to the historical context of the spiritual. And then we will talk about why they're relevant today, why they're still performed today, why we still pay to see them performed. And then if we have time at the end, we'll do a nice listening and interpretation of the concert spiritual towards the end, all right? So what is a spiritual? Sandra G. Graham, who is an author that I've read her book a lot as it pertains to my research, defines the spiritual as a religious folk song created by African Americans within the 19th century. Most spirituals, they do allude to Old Testament heroes who overcame their struggles and their plights. Spirituals often do have connotation that does relate to Christianity through attitudes and themes, attitudes such as, emotions such as the Judgment Day, sorrow, finding hope, and finding peace, and themes such as the Judgment Day, crossing over into heaven, and patience, which is a common theme throughout the African American story. Within most spirituals, there is a duality, meaning that there is a literal meaning as well as there's a hidden meaning within the text, and we will explore that throughout this entire lesson. So, folk spirituals, they are a subgenre of the spiritual. So during the time of slavery, this type of song was considered energetic and innovative through things like improvisation. They use improv through words, melody, which is like the tune we sing, tempo, which is how fast or how slow. So if I'm talking really fast, it's blah, 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 and if I'm going slow, that's, yeah, all right? All right, and so then harmony. Harmony is the moving parts above and below the tune, i.e. the melody, and dynamics, which is how loud or how soft things are being spoken or sung. Okay, moving on. Community-oriented call and response is a fantastic example of this. So for those of you who are not familiar with call and response refers to There's a song leader, and then based off of what I say, you then say what I said. So like if I say, hi, everybody, then you might reply, hi, everybody. Awesome, you got it. Alrighty, a cappella. Can anybody define a cappella for me? Without music. Awesome, appreciate that, Queen. Well, no, it's not without music. It's without instrumentation. Yes, which means like there's no band, there's no piano, there's no organ, no nothing. So it's just voices in a cacophony of sound. Awesome, right? So the importance of Jim Miller, McKim, and Lucy McKim and Henry G. Spalding is that they documented spirituals. So around this time, picture it, we are in 1862, right? And so the Emancipation was signed in 1863. So during this time, these people, they thought that with the end of slavery would be the end of spirituals and folk spirituals. So they went into plantations and basically had slaves perform them, and then they notated what they heard. Notating means writing out like the actual lyric and melody of what's being sung. Any questions about that? All right, moving forward. Okay, so as I said, concert spirituals came from folk spirituals. The reason why they are concert spirituals is because they are arranged for a choir to be sung in a concert, hence the name, concert spiritual. Right, awesome. Getting it, yes. So, concert spirituals combine the uniqueness and creativity of African performance with the influence of Western classical music. So, yeah. Concert spirituals are folk spirituals that were arranged with the help of people like Fisk Jubilee Singers, and John Wesley Work Jr. and John Wesley Work III. The Fisk Jubilee Singers exposed the world to the concert spiritual for a lot of reasons, but mainly here's the primary one. So Fisk University, where I attend, Dartisha and Aaliyah attend, whoop whoop, Fisk fam. Basically, so we opened our doors January 9th, 1866. 5 years later, on October 6th, 1871, we were in like dire straits financially. So George L. White, who was the treasurer as well as the music director of the Fisk Jubilee Singers, said, hey, we'll go on a tour to raise some money, right? And so through that, so at first the Jubilee Singers did not want to sing Negro spirituals because of the history that was behind it, and understandably because it was really like right there. But as they sang like hymns and white classical music, it wasn't really well perceived by the audience. They wanted them to sing more spiritual. So George L. White had Ella Shepherd, who was the leader of the group, or the mother figurehead of the group, arrange spirituals for them. So yes. John Wesley Work Jr., he was an educator. He was also the director of the Fisk Jubilee Singers, as well as his son. John Jr., he was, at the turn of the 20th century, was when he was the director of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And John Wesley Work, he's very instrumental in arranging spirituals for the Fisk Jubilee Singers, and we still do perform them to this day. Why does all of this matter? So the Fisk Jubilee Singers were able to bridge the gap between races. So at any point during a concert, they would request a venue from anywhere between 800 to 1,000 people. And they wouldn't perform if there were limitations placed on seating. So you could be a white person next to a black person in the face of all this racial divide and tension, but for a brief moment in time, you're just enjoying music that's being sung. So they have been really instrumental in that. Spirituals also have had a profound influence on other genres, such as gospel, blues, jazz, and those genres have led to other genres as well. Wade in the water. Can somebody read this first line for me? Good job. Okay. Now, could someone please define what wade means? What does it mean to wade? Kendra. To go through. Anybody else? Dartisha. Anybody else? You have to go through, to move. Jack. To what? To wallow in. And anybody else?
To escape.
To escape. All these are fantastic. Let's see. What does children mean within this context, do you think? God's children. Anybody else? Okay. Now, we've been talking about waiting. That's great. We've been talking about children. Fine. What do you think water is? What do you think it symbolizes within this historical context? Dom. Obstacles? Anybody? Aaliyah? Sense of purity? Yes. Yes. And the struggle, right. All these are very good. Keep these in mind. What do you think God's gonna trouble the water means? Dartisha? Right, okay. Christoph, you had your hand up?
Yeah, similar to Dartisha, in the biblical reference in the scripture, it does talk about how God's going to come and trouble the water, meaning the water is going to move, and then it would be a place where healing would take place.
Fantastic. Nice segue. Take us to church. Okay. So, this is the story, healing at the pool. So an angel comes down during a season, and they trouble the water, right? And so who's ever first in the pool, they will be healed of all their ailments, and they'll be made pure again. Okay, so that's what it means in a biblical context. To the slaves, it meant you need to wade in the water so that your scent cannot be tracked by the search dogs of the slave owners. And then God's gonna trouble the water means that it will cause trouble for the slave owner when you're in the water, because that's a safe space for you. Okay? Alrighty. All right, so moving on. What do you hear? Oh, I'll play a song for you. So I'm going to play Wade in the Water for you. While you hear these songs, got you. While you hear these songs, what do you hear? Do you hear that it might go loud and then soft? Things like that. Describe the tempo, how fast or how slow the song's being sung. Did you hear anything that can relate back to the text? Do we need historical context to interpret spirituals? Imagine yourself wading through water. What characteristics within the music portray that action? Okay? First question, what did you hear? Jacqueline. Dynamic contrast, can you explain what that means? Okay, anybody else?
I heard
Emergence of voices, blending of voices? Okay, so these are fantastic observations. So to Jacqueline's point, when you're creeping up or like you're swelling down, and like when they repeated when they repeated the chorus, it got really, really soft. So at that point, it's like you're really paying attention to what's around you, and you're really focused, and you're really trying to hide. So during that point in the song, that's a very good point. So we do hear a nice blend of voices, which makes it easy to listen to, right? Okay, next question. Describe the tempo. Queen. Okay. Right, so with the context of the song, would you wade through water fast if you're trying to sneak away? So that's probably why the song is slow, right? All right, next question. I'm sorry, I'm in the way. Did you hear anything that can relate back to the text within the song? And it may be the tempo, that's what you heard. Christoph.
Well, I think you hear the swelling of wait in the water.
So there's an emphasis on wait, the importance of waiting.
Yes.
Right.
And I think as it pertains to your question, as it relates back to the text, and we're talking about going through water, of course you have to, move, but like water is moving as you're moving, and water like it goes
Right.
up and it comes back and grows.
Good
and
observation.
pools. And so I think that is definitely reflected in the arrangement.
Aaliyah, great job.
I'll keep mine really, really brief. When I think of this, I think of like the story of Moses when he split the Red Sea.
Exactly. I had that in my notes, but time. So, do we need historical context to interpret spirituals? Can I have people from over here perhaps answer?
So I don't think you need the historical context, but I think that it does help.
Why do you think it helps?
Still gain meaning from the song without relating it back to like slavery, but I think that gives it another layer of understanding.
Do we agree?
No.
Why not?
I would respectfully disagree because I feel as though, I sing spiritual, so I feel as though it is necessary to know the origins of the music you perform, and as somebody who studies music, like we always talk about, if you don't know like where this came from, why are you singing? Because you don't know what's behind it. So I think, of course, you could look at it and take it from the surface level, and that's nice. But
Right.
to be to perform something, I think you need to be well informed so that you can know how to approach the music. You can know how to perform the music. You can know what leeway do I have as an artist, and what leeway do I not have as an artist in order to be authentic to the origins.
Right. One more, JC.
I really think it depends on your position and like how you are relating to the song. Because if you are the audience,
May I stop you? Actually, no. Keep going. Keep going. Audience. Yeah.
because if you are in the audience, I think like if you don't know the historical context, you still can gain a lot of meaning from when you hear this. Like you just played it, and I'm pretty sure that everyone in the room felt a variety of emotions. So yes, if you are seeing that, I do understand Christophe's point of view. Historical context can help, but even if you are seeing that, I think there are emotions that will naturally swell in you that are still significant.
So, in context, the music is speaking to you through however they perform it, but historical context does play a huge role in that. So, in conclusion, wrapping it up. Okay, no, shh. There we go. So, interpretation is a skill that can be used in all areas, not just music. I've taken you through steps to help you interpret music, perhaps. However, it's very interdisciplinary. So, interpretation means to find the meaning within something. So with whatever you do, whatever you study, find the meaning in whatever you're doing. Like Dom said, find your truth, right? And look at the entire picture, not just one aspect that's being presented to you. Alrighty, so thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Hello. Just quick preliminary thought. Shout out. With that being said, sociology, at the base is obviously the study of society, but it's mainly examining the relationships of the social institutions as it relates to public issues. So, I don't know how y'all feel about sociology, especially Spencer. I know she doesn't really like it that much, but for these 15 minutes, you guys are now sociologists. We are going to examine our institution is education, and you guys are going to be practicing sociological thought. All right. So, John Franklin Bobbitt and Frederick Taylor, two dead white men. John Franklin Bobbitt, he started off as a lecturer at the University of Chicago, but he was promoted during the year of 1910 to the instructor of school education at University of Chicago. That's significant because he was very instrumental in curriculum studies. So how he's connected to Frederick Taylor. Frederick Taylor was a mechanical engineer, and during the same year, 1910, his theory of scientific management and factory production debuted, and it took the world by storm. He was the first management consultant, and John Franklin Bobbitt, being the educator that he is, examined Frederick Taylor's theories and implemented it into education. And what that looks like is the educational assembly line. Okay, so I have to draw now, and I'm pretty bad at drawing, but you guys are going to help me out. So when you think of a factory, I need you guys to raise your hands. What are the different parts that make a factory work? Like the actual factory? Cool, got you. All right, boom. We'll do a little smoke. All right. Product, you do need product. Employees as well, okay. All right, so let's draw. Well, before you have the product, thank you, boom, all right. So we are going to make the belt, boom, and then I guess this will be the product, and this will be the finished product. So what are we missing? Aaliyah? True. True. Didn't think about that, but true. I'm not really looking for that right now. But Christoph? Oh, the bosses. Correct, correct. You need a manager. All right, telling the workers what to do. And I kind of just like spilled out the last part with the workers. So we're going to draw a worker working on the assembly line. All right. Yeah, so these are all the parts I need. So I'm going to briefly go through the pieces. Whoa, what's going on? The pieces of, all right, hold up. Cool. All right. So the pieces of the educational assembly line. So the actual factory is the education system. The manager is the administrator. The worker is the teacher. The product are, does anybody know what the product is? Yes. Boom, 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 boom. So Bobbitt implemented the scientific management within this model of education, and he specifically said that this model would predict the social and economic lives of the students according to their vocational destiny, so according to the type of jobs that they will require. Yeah. So the managers are the administrators and the principals. So can I get somebody to read this quote?
It is the job of the administrator to gather all possible information about the educational process to develop the best methods for teachers to get students to meet the standards.
Yes, and this was John Bobbitt. Factory workers. Can I get somebody to read this quote as well? Dartish.
The burden of finding the best methods is too large and too complicated to be laid on the shoulders of the teacher. The ultimate worker, the teacher in our case, must be a specialist in the performance of the labor that will produce the product.
Interesting. Yeah, we'll touch back on that. And the products, Mustafa.
Raw materials to shape into finished products according to their future social conditions.
Interesting. All right. So, through those quotations and what I presented to you guys, what are the norms and values that are reflected within this model? Shane. Ooh, yeah, homogeneous learning. Everybody learns the same way. I like that point. Anyone else? I know. Oh, that's what you're going to say, Christoph? Okay. Queen?
The assumption that the administrator knows what's best for student learning and teachers
Yeah, so kind of that disconnect. The administrator's up here, the student is down here. How do the administrator and the student connect? You see that? Boom.
The whole picture of education is just to produce not only students, but for the students to be producers and further workers.
Yeah, interesting. Kind of relates to our society, the capitalism that's present, that we are commodifying the student experience and not actually providing them with the tools to be critical thinkers. So how does this look present day, this educational assembly line? So you know that this theory was kind of put out there during the early 20th century, and it's interesting to examine it present day because we use some of the same languages of standardization currently. So 41 states and also the Department of Defense education activity have adopted Common Core state standards. So where standards fall in this educational assembly line is that the administrator sets the objectives and the standards to be implemented within the classroom setting. So they basically create the guidelines for the students. And also, the U.S. Department of Education has provided more than $350 million to 2 consortia of states to develop high-quality assessments that are benchmarked to new standards. So with this implementation of standards, it also relates to high-stakes testing. You can see that. I don't know if you guys have taken these tests, but the Partnership for Assessment of Readiness for College and Careers, blah, 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 the PARC test, and the Smarter Balance Assessment Consortium test. Those are 2 different tests that are, have been created through this implementation of Common Core standards. All right, so I want to know y'all perspective. Do you disagree or agree that this should be an ideal model of education implemented within American public schools? Why or why not? Yeah.
Okay. I disagree because even if you like refer back to the drawing, when you start out with the students, like the before students, they're circles, but then you can see the after they have transformed themselves. So I feel like this method, it literally like the student doesn't grow, rather the student like conforms or changes its identity. Like so the student is not a better or a better person. They're not a better model of themselves. They're just someone like a completely new person. So I disagree with it.
I think it's a good model because students don't know what they're doing when they're 5 or 6 or 7 or 13 or 14. And we need professors and teachers who are really smart to kind of guide us toward which a particular vocation or a certain job. So I think it's a good model. I think the Common Core is also a good model because we need to have states all at similar standards and we need to have some benchmark for understanding like where our society is.
Julian?
As someone that was in the public school system, and I do think that Common Core standards have this issue with kind of speeding through with the student rather than actually having them be engaged with the material. So you're having kids when they go to college be held back not because they didn't learn the material, but because they were just taught to memorize. So that's the issue.
Andrew?
If there's a part that I would actually keep with this is the structure. Children need structure as they learn. However, but children also do need specific freedoms within their learning, but that, which is not that. And so the structure for that is perfectly fine, but children need that freedom, that sense of exploration within their academic space.
Interesting point. All right, last one, Frankie.
I agree with Andrew, like the structure-wise, but I don't think that like Common Core, like especially like the PARC exams, like it's supposed to be like career readiness, reading about like golf and dolphins and like a reading and then having to answer questions about the main idea is not helping you get to your career at all, in my opinion. And being in these states, like living in New York, where these are the common curricular, all we hear is teachers who are
Definitely. So my research, the function of tracking. If you guys don't know, tracking is basically the sorting of students into certain curriculum, course curriculum, who basically it sorts the students who are like in ability. So I have a question. Raise your hand if you have taken AP courses. Raise your hand if you've taken honors courses. Raise your hand if you've taken dual enrollment courses. Okay. Raise your hand if you've taken IB courses or international. Okay, cool. So you see the homogeneous kind of group that we have. We're all in higher education, and we've all taken these advanced level courses. So that's just an interesting thing to note. And in conclusion, I just wanted to make the point that as we are within these systems, I feel as if we should be critiquing them instead of just appealing to the tradition of things. We need to deconstruct these different models, whether or not keep the things that have value and throw away the things that kind of don't, or reform. So I think that's kind of the purpose of transforming the academy. As we look at these different social problems, we need to figure out how we can come to a solution as well. So thank you very much.